This is the Nobel Podcast, where we talk about how to optimize your technology, life, and mind. We're joined by special operations veterans, entrepreneurs, investors, and others who have overcome difficulty to make it to the top of their craft by staying in the fight. I'm Sam Alaimo. Welcome to the Nobel Podcast. I have Jason Gusic of Westside Warrior and founder of Conjugate Tactical. Welcome.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, let's start where we always do. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Northwest Indiana, where just probably like everybody who joined the military swore I was never coming back and got out and came right back. But I grew up in a small town called Lake Station or East Gary, if try not to fancy it up too much. And then ended up moving about 20 minutes away from where I grew up to a little town called Chesterton. And that's where I've been since 07, 08, maybe.
What was your earliest memory of wanting to join the Marine Corps?
And I really don't know. On that one, it's like, I think everyone, when you're a kid, is like, you watch, at least my age group, you watch like Red Dawn and G.I. Joe cartoons and go to the woods and do all that kind of goofy stuff. But I think I got serious, like actually entertaining joining the military probably by the end of my 10th grade year in high school, and 11th grade, it was pretty much a done deal. I was just waiting to turn 18. So somewhere around that like 16, 17-year-old age was like, yeah, this is the route I'm going to take. And that, it predates 9/11. It was just more of like, I need to get the hell out of here because nothing good comes from this area, it seems like.
Okay. I mean, you're in kind of a hardcore profession right now. You're a Marine Corps. I wonder when you were a kid, were you a hoodlum or were you a pretty straight-laced?
Like there's some dudes doing much worse stuff than me, but for a white boy that grew up in the suburbs of Indiana, like we were kind of a pain in the ass, like a, classic story, like, just like, I don't know, man, we smoke a little bit of weed and, some of the guys who had cool older brothers would buy us some beers, but nothing too drastic or dark, like knocked over some people's garbage cans and broke some window, just normal high school kid stuff, but nothing dark like you hear on some people's experience and stuff.
So you said pre 9/11. When did you actually get into the Marine Corps?
I was on that trajectory. I knew that's where I wanted to go, and like the dorky kid just hanging out the recruiter's office forever. But I ended up, my parents wouldn't sign for me being young. Dad was a Vietnam vet, or still is a Vietnam vet. If you're going, we'll support you, but we're not going to do the parental signature, whatever that was. I can't remember what that was called. But I legitimately signed up on my 18th birthday of July 5th, 2001. I woke up, had breakfast with my mom because my dad was at work, drove out to the recruiter's office like 20 minutes, 30 minutes away, signed up, and just kind of sat there from there, Were you in boot camp when 9/11 happened? I was in the delayed entry program for quite a while. And then 9/11 happened. So I was supposed to ship within weeks. So it was like, just get me the heck out of here. But I guess when you've got an 18-year-old kid who's already signed up, they're going to kind of stage the chessboard for where they need to fill a quota. So then it was like, well, 9/11 popped off and it's like, well, get me out of here. I want to go do stuff. And it's like, well, yeah, we've got hundreds of people signing up. So we'll get to you when we get to you. And so they kept shifting me around, but I actually didn't head off to boot camp until December of 01.
You're 18, about to go into the Marine Corps, a combat unit. 9/11 happened, and you were just, let me in. I want to go.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't, like, I was an artilleryman when I started, and I just ended up doing, just like anything, my entire adult life has been falling back asswards into cool scenarios that I don't deserve to be in. But it was honestly, I signed up to get out of here and try to do something. I originally wanted to do like Air Force or Navy and just kind of follow the trade route, but I was like, the artillery thing seemed pretty interesting. Maybe the recruiter just needed to fill a billet. I don't know, but he sold it. And so I signed up for that. And then, I never really had a, like, this is so long ago, at 41 years old, but I never really had that like regret or, buyer's or the equivalent of buyer's remorse or anything. It was just more like even keel, like, let's just kind of like shit or get off the pot, for lack of a better term. And then when that went, it really reaffirmed like, okay, like this went from getting some college money and traveling to big boy rules now. And it was like, well, I don't know what I don't know, but still want to do this. And, then I think you layer in some ignorance of youth and stuff like that. Just the generic want to go get some kind of thing. That was pretty much it. So once they sent me December, it was like, yeah, this is what we're doing now.
Where'd you end up deploying?
So that's the funny part of all that like moto stuff. I ended up sitting in Hawaii and Japan for 3.5 years or so, and it was luckily like we got there was a program going that we could volunteer for to go like to Afghanistan, but ahead of Afghanistan, it was your traditional 3rd Marine Division deployments. So We went to Okinawa for, 6 or 7 months at a time, and then punched out to various spots throughout Asia. But I mean, it really was a wonderful experience of, everything from Singapore, Thailand, Japan, Korea, you name it. Like, we went all over Asia, and that was a really cool experience. And then when all that got said and done, the option to go to Afghanistan came, and went for that, and ended up having to extend for another year and some change to make that work. And so that was pretty much it, man. It was in and out of Hawaii for 4 years, roughly 4 years. And then spent back-to-back deployments in Afghanistan for a year, give or take, somewhere right around a year.
Was it a 1-year deployment or 2 smaller deployments?
So it started off, the original plan was a 1 year, or at least this is how I understood it and remember it. But it started off as a 1 year, and then they decided to move us back to just a 6-month once we were already in country. So guys could volunteer to kind of relieve in place and do a second deployment, or go home at this new 6-month mark. And almost everybody in our group stayed for the full long haul. One guy ended up signing on for like another 3 months. So, but yeah, so it was the equivalent of 2 deployments as it was administratively listed. And then it was just basically staying in country for a year. We don't really have a plan for this, so you guys just relieve yourselves and stay for another 6 months while we figure it out.
So what did you get into over that 12-month period in Afghanistan?
Man, it was slow to start. So like this was the early days of the embedded teams. And we were in the southeast of Afghanistan when it was an army country. So we were in a little area called the Paktika province. And according to locals, it was a country called Waziristan, which is not a real place. But, we landed in Bagram and then punched out to our FOBs. And a group of us went to Tillman to start, and then had to convoy and bring a group. This was like the precursor to the Afghan National Army. Like, there was no NATO weapons or supplies. Like, we'd find a supply of RPGs and AKs and be like, cool, you guys, who doesn't have a gun yet? Here's one, So this was very poorly supervised. We were maybe 15 Marines, 2 corpsmen, so 17 of us, and of, I believe, 30-ish total Marines in country. So, like I said, poorly supervised, but that made for a lot of fun. But we started off in Tillman, worked our way up to Burmel. And then from Burmel, we worked between Burmel and Shkin as our primary FOBs on the border there in Pakistan. So it was a lot of just open patrolling with really no outcomes. And, we'd find a lot of weapons and stuff, but that's not anything crazy over there. And we fell in our FOB at the time was run by Third Group. So we got to cut our teeth with the guys from ODA 332. And they taught us, basically they taught us everything on how to stay alive. Like, we have no losses on our team. Do the stuff that we do, and it's probably going to go okay for you. We're like, awesome. So literally just pull out notebooks and learn from those dudes. But gunfighting started in the spring, and then we'd work between the border and out in the mountains back and forth. And then it's just typical stories of, some ambushes. Selfishly, we were fortunate that IEDs didn't really start at a large level until our last couple of months in country. So we didn't get a whole lot of experience there. Gunfights, a little bit of the IED and the old munitions from the Soviet era being repurposed. And I want to say that we did some benefit in the big picture thinking of training up these militias and then essentially converting them into the ANA. But I really don't think that we made a bit of a difference in hindsight as far as the big picture goes. But
to maybe wrap up the military, what was the best aspect of the military you had, and what was the worst aspect of the military?
The two sides of the coin of leadership, in all honesty. There's still lessons that running my business and everything now from the good leaders that are forever embedded in me. And it's probably a byproduct of aging, but the more and more experiences that I can remember and recall from bad supervisors, I'm not going to say bad leadership, because I don't think there is such a thing as a bad leader. A leader is good sort of by nature. And there's bad dudes or shitheads that fall in leadership roles. But in the immediate, the piss poor management and fake leadership was terrible to endure. But being so far separated from the military and in charge of some stuff now, those lessons of terrible leadership or management are invaluable at this phase of my life. So I have to say that the good leadership that we experienced was wonderful, because that really kind of sets your foundation. But more beneficial than that was the terrible examples of men in leadership roles that shouldn't be there, because it teaches you exactly how you shouldn't behave or treat human beings. So that would definitely be 2 versions of the best experience. And then the worst, I would say in the immediate, was being at the mercy of those guys in those bad people in leadership roles. That was the worst portion of it. And then now, I mean, there's really no negative at the end of the day, other than, a few missed nights of sleep and whatever. Like, made my problems be so small. So I really have no real negatives I've drawn from the military, minus, bad knees. What can you do about that and whatnot? So it was a wonderful experience for me.
Yeah, I had a super similar experience, and it's hard to articulate it. You said it well. Like, you see a really good leader, you don't know the magic that goes into that, that how they actually did it. But a bad leader, it's a concrete, just don't do that.
1,000%.
So having that military experience, coming back out, what's something that the military did extremely well that you think the private sector should do more of?
Man, I would say efficiency, in all honesty. The simplicity and organization of like fire teams. Cool. You got a couple years under your belt. You got 3 new guys. Squad leader has, 3 fire team leaders. Platoon sergeant has 3 squad leaders. Like just the very simplicity and organization and the path of least resistance from point A to point B typically gets the job done. Like the biggest joke in the Marines, like when you kind of pick up corporal, at least for us, was like the best way to get things done is just have PFCs and lance corporals just tell them to get it done, and they're going to find the most efficient way to get it done because it's their liberty or their lunch hour at risk. So they're going to knock it out of the park and not overcomplicate things. And I feel that that's kind of what's missing in the private sector, or even depending on how you define private sector. So like for-profit businesses, nonprofits, things like that are what most people consider private. And then for us and the work we do, contracting and our education component, it's like we call our private work, the things we do at federal or various stages of government. I would say if the private sector, whether it's the public-facing private sector, which most of us would refer to, you really don't kind of break the habit or the culture of priding oneself and overcomplicating very simple tasks. I think that this thing would be a hell of a lot more efficient. But when you balance, like, let's say like performance-based professions like commission-based or if you've got a certain volume of work to get done, there's some like tech companies that they don't give you an 8-hour day. You just get a task list, and when it's done, and you go home. So if you reward efficiency, things become more efficient. And if you just follow the standard, like, I was a police officer for a while, and I made the same amount of money if I wrote 40 tickets a day or 0 tickets. And it's like, well, for some people who aren't wired to basically reap what you sow or eat what you kill, things can get convoluted and pretty complicated for no real reason. Man, don't make things more complicated than they have to be. Like Microsoft Excel is a pretty simple platform to navigate, man.
There's a lot of talk, I'd say over the last 10 years, particularly over the last 5 years, about the transition from the military to the civilian world. It's tough. You transitioned out before I think there was almost any interest in figuring out how to make that easier for the operators when they get out. Did you have a difficult time when you transitioned out of the Marine Corps?
At the time, no. That's the benefit of like the ignorance of youth. I left at 23. In hindsight, dude, I was a freaking mess. And, I don't want to like peel back layers and make this all like boohoo, woe is me stuff because, it's fine. But yeah, man, when I got out, like, it was like the accountability component. So we came home from warfighting in, we'll call it Halloween 06. And there really wasn't a lot of programs in place, like for decompression or like the warrior transition stuff that eventually came out. So at least in our base, it was like, man, sign up for this roster, make sure you hit these 3 courses, and then you're readapted, you're good to go back into stateside military service. And it's like, we're 20-something-year-old Marines. Like, you're going to figure out how to game that and then go get hammered in the barracks at noon. It's not a big deal. And then, looking back on it, it's like, that was a critical component, was 2 or 3 months of post-war fighting, but military service, and then military service to civilian life was like, man, we really mishandled that. But I don't really think that there was a big focus on quality of life or any sort of like end state. Been, privy to some of these dudes who have handled it well and poorly, and just gathering experience from them is that the guys who really embraced the training options to readapt are doing much better than the guys who went my route, who just tried to drink it away and distract yourself from any sort of unpacking. And, I personally believe, outside looking in over all these years now, that it has gotten a heck of a lot better, man.
Let's bridge the gap from getting out of the military to Westside Warrior. How did you end up?
we had to figure something out. And Jess, my wife, kind of tricked me into opening a gym because I think like any good wife or partner, they know how to push your buttons. So she, kind of taunted me into opening a gym as a challenge. And I was like, okay, like I'll do that. But I didn't really know how. So we had the same tattoo artist, and she set up a quick meeting for Drew, the guy who did our tattoos, to teach me how to start a business. And it turns out you just basically call the IRS, get a number, and now you have a business, and just go set up a checking account. You're good. So thankfully that was a simple process. And so we were running a CrossFit affiliate for a while, which led to finding Westside Barbell back on the main page back in the day. This is 07, 08. And by May of 09, we left the garage and went brick and mortar. And so we run a CrossFit, having a great time doing it. And then that led us to getting some fighters and stuff in here when MMA was kind of on the rise. And my wife's sort of lifelong best friend was a dude who was fighting in the WEC. And then the UFC absorbed the WEC, but we had been training and inadvertently had gone from, I would say, fitness enthusiasts to, oh shit, we have pro athletes in our gym now, and we better not screw this up. And that was the catalyst for kind of pursuing education in regard to strength and conditioning. And so we're tooling around the CrossFit main site and found Westside Barbell in the sort of like friends and family section back when the page was yellow and it was like real basic. It was awesome era. But went out to a seminar at Westside, and this is October, give or take, October 09. And I remember because I was a rookie cop and was like, might have had to swipe my own squad car that I wasn't allowed to use to drive to Columbus because we only had one car and we were broke as shit. I'm like, well, I know I could gas this thing up. And it kind of, so, I've donated some money to the FOP since then to make good, but went out there to the seminar. And this was one of the first ones when Lou, used to have the seminar at the gym there versus, shutting that down and just punching out teams to teach it. So went out there and sat in on the seminar, learned everything we were missing here. We knew we needed to get stronger, not just fitter. Breathing is good, but we always use the term in our work now. We always kind of encourage people to find the working balance of ass and mass versus gas. And it's like, okay, so I don't need a 65-pound barbell monster. I need someone who can, balance it out. And you got to think this stuff has evolved so much now that, back in the day, the goal was a 500-pound deadlift and was a 7-minute row or whatever it was. And now it's like, you see what those boys are doing at the games now. It's insane. But that's kind of what started the Westside thing. And then just kind of coming back and forth from there. And I live about 4.5 hours from Westside Barbell where I'm at now. And Lou, he's passed, but Lou, his entire life since I knew him, was always like, you're always welcome to training. Visitors always like education. So I just kept going back and forth over and over and over again to just sit in, fly on the wall with a notebook kind of thing, and started going out there. And then Lou recalled who I was from the seminar because I was the only guy that bought books. So I was like, oh shit, like I didn't know Louis hated pictures at the time. So everyone's getting their photos and stuff. And of course I got one too, but everyone over there racing get photos with Lou. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, man, there's only a few books on the table because Westside, the business then is nowhere near what it is now. And so I'm like, fuck dude, like I'm not real tough. And I'm probably gonna have to fist fight over these books because I only see like 2 or 3 of them. And I mean, obviously there was dozens of copies in the boxes behind the table, but like I said, I'm not too sharp, man. And so I ended up getting the books, and I guess that made a good impression on Lou because Lou was a book nerd for sure, man. And bring back that stuff about MMA. They say it's like we made the joke when we first started talking about just falling back asswards into cool scenarios. We were at the fights. Our dude was fighting. I can't remember which card it was, but it was one of the John Jones cards. And so our buddy was co-main, and Dana White used to do the behind the scenes video with his iPhone, and everyone's just leaving the sauna, and our dude had a Westside hoodie on, which wasn't a sponsorship or anything. It was just, man, dude gets out of the sauna, you just wrap him in a sweatsuit so the heat stays. And I mean, I don't know what it's like in your neck of the woods, but every gym bro has or should have a Westside Barbell hoodie. Like that's just the way the world works. And so, like I said, I mean, it was this fast, man, of our guy walking across the screen, leaving the sauna, and Westside put up this huge post on Facebook about, who's this, what's this? Because back then there was no map. There was no roadmap for MMA and strength and conditioning, at least. I never fought in the UFC or anything like that. But it seemed the writing was on the wall that this whole system that is Westside Barbell makes a lot of sense for fighting. And we just, we figured some stuff out that worked for our guy at the time. And that's kind of what got us on the radar, because I'd reached back out after seeing that post, because we'd built a rapport with some of the guys over the years, because this was '09 from the seminar to about 2012 when that video was taken. And we just figured out a way to train. We're using the methods for MMA, but Lou loved fighting of all sorts, And we sent a note like, hey, man, I saw the post. This is what we're talking about. There's our guys, in the UFC. And you have to think back then, everybody had the next heavyweight champ, the next this, because this thing was so new to the world that it's like, no, like when we say our dude's in the UFC, like he's legitimately in that league, man. So we're not embellishing the success of our athletes. And again, it's their success. We're just basically count to 10 for them and run a stopwatch, as a strength coach. But that caused Lou to bring us out to be like, all right, let's see who these people are. And then Lou connected with Red Wire. He's like, oh, you're the guy from the seminar that's been coming out here. I'm like, yeah, like this is our dude we were telling you about. They're like, okay, cool. And then Lou and Tom Barry, who, Irish Tom, who's running the show now out there since Lou's passed, they beat the unholy crap out of us. We drove 4.5, 5 hours out there. And it was like, we got out of the car. Of course, we were a little bit late, because that's just the way the world works. It's like, try to make a good first impression, show up 15 minutes late, just immediate, like right to like physical hazing. But it was awesome. It wasn't like, it wasn't just being a jerk for the sake of being a jerk. It was like, we're going to really see what these dudes have, because it's no joke there, like inside the walls of Westside Barbell, regardless of what era. And so, no matter what, it's, from what I'm experienced around being around some of you dudes, it's the same thing of like, if you're good at something, they're just going to find a way to make you bad at it, no matter what you do at some point in your life. It's not a forever lifestyle. And so it's basically a vetting process to see if these guys are kind of, pusses or whatnot. And so we got our initial round out of the way. And then Tom and I believe Matt was there, Matt Brown, a handful of fighters were training in the gym there at the time as well. They went off to go do whatever it is they did. It did not look comfortable. And I went and lifted weights with Lou, and like, you got to balance not being a puss and also answer a million questions from God knows what about physics to kinesiology to this, that, and the other. And while you're getting the hell beat out of you by, the godfather of all this stuff, you just got in the car and went home after lunch, and then got home to an email of basically, you work here now. We don't know what you're going to do, but you're here. And, it's like, okay, we said more smart things than stupid things, apparently. And then over the course of the next year or two, our guy ended up fighting for a title in the UFC, another John Jones card. So we're somehow just got to send that dude a thank you card apparently someday. But, we got our dude to the highest levels. Didn't go his way, unfortunately, but, performed well. Everything went well. And we were working in the business of Westside Barbell, training athletes, running my gym, and the whole time being a cop. And then something had to give after all those years of trying to do everything all the time. So talked to my wife, and, she's like, why don't we button up the law enforcement and you go full time at Westside, which was an option that was presented to me. And that kind of separated me from law enforcement at the end of 2014. And, it was a great department. I try to speak. There's a lot of bad, just like military, there's a lot of shitheads, but there's a lot of world-class people there as well. And it was a wealth of experience I'm grateful for. But they kept me on payroll through vacation and comp time and all that stuff for a little while, so I could transition to full civilian life versus quasi police-ish paramilitary. It gets weird there. And then that's what led to me full-time at Westside Barbell, and then fell in on the business side of things and education. And then that just kept growing. And then my gym here kind of turned into the outpost. And then it's just been kind of a version of that ever since, for lack of a better term.
Let's maybe zoom out for those who don't know what Westside is and who Lou is. And if you can give like a brief overview of those two, and then how you fit Conjugate Tactical into that whole framework. Let's go there.
Yeah. So Westside Barbell, the address has changed. Lou has passed, but ultimately, no matter where it's located geographically, that, I'm a huge fan. Don't get me wrong. I am a diehard company guy. Lou put the dog on my leg in 2013. So there's no going back, even if I wanted to. But no matter where the gym has been located, if it's the current location, 497 Industry Drive, the spaces that predated to include Lou's Garage, for most, it's the tip of the spear as far as the advancement of sports science. And the theme there, or the overarching ethos, is that we follow the conjugate method, which is a Soviet-based method of strength training that takes into account the multitude of special strengths that are out there. So, you always hear the, like, got to be fast but strong, got to have a gas tank, but, also deadlift. I think like we kind of glanced at earlier, but it's all being executed there already. So All of this stuff is there for the taking. And Lou organized it into what we know the conjugate method to be nowadays, or the Westside barbell methods, by combining the former Soviet work, the Soviet and Bulgarian work. This is what stems from like the Dynamo Club, if anyone does go down this rabbit hole. But everything that was being performed, by the Eastern European countries prior to the fall of the Soviet Union, and then combined it with some of the special exercises work that was being done out in Culver City, California, while he was in the Army, because Lou was drafted during the Vietnam era, but sent to Germany in lieu of Vietnam. And so Lou had, this, what should be considered, in my opinion, and I should say my opinion, but what I consider to be cutting edge information for the West on how to train between the guys at Culver City and then the methodology of the conjugate system. And that morphed into what I would consider most to be the conjugate system of the Westside methods today. And then Lou himself is the guy that put it all together. He started Westside as a tribute to the Culver City Barbell Club, named it as such, and it's kind of the less than ideal portion of Columbus, Ohio. And then for the actual existence of it, take all of those components and ingredients, and he's essentially the driver who's been beta testing and creating the advancement of sports science under the Westside barbell methodology for, prior to his passing, 30, 40 years of all of it. So ultimately, most of us consider him to be the godfather of all things strength in the United States and probably the world. And then Westside Barbell is his gym / company that all of us have fallen under. And then Conjugate Tactical, it was prior to taking a name in 2018 when we started the Conjugate Club, which is Westside's online training platform. This really was just the work that we did. We vamped up the system to train our MMA dudes here at the gym in Indiana. And as a byproduct of being prior military, and I wasn't a soft guy or anything, but had some military experience, and then my law enforcement experience, the questions that come across their plate, and granted, I worked on the business side of the house at Westside. I'm not a lifter for, you're not going to see my name anywhere near those record boards out there. But Conjugate Tactical, before it was named that in 2018, due to the Conjugate Club, was just the work at Westside, because all of us have a collateral duty there, and that you should, if you're not an athlete, you should be an instructor / educator, coach, whatever you want to call it. And when the questions would come in, well, how do I do this for law enforcement? And this, again, predates the tactical strength and conditioning stuff that's out now. It was oh man, well, here's what we do to train our guys. And just, again, falling back asswards into it, our dudes that we're fighting, that's 80%, 80-20 rule, but 80% of what a majority of the whether it's a special operator, big mill, law enforcement, fire, this first responder space, the outside of the intensity and the techniques of fighting, this is a very similar series of demands that these folks need. And so we started organizing training, and it would fall on my plate to answer those questions or travel to speak to those groups or departments, units, etc. And then, when we released the Conjugate Club, Tom Barry, like I said, he's the fellow that's running the show now. He was Lou's number 2 for years and years and years, and now he's the operator of Westside Barbell. But my section of the Conjugate Club was tactical, and I was okay. And so we started trying to organize our workouts for the masses, and that presents challenges and whatnot, but it started to get legs underneath it. And it's oh shit, well, we go to great lengths to hide my gym locally here in Indiana because we don't really want to deal with a whole lot of people. And so it makes no sense to run a company we're trying to hide and then expand into this existence of Conjugate Tactical. So we morphed the company, and that's really how it was launched. And once it seemed like a good idea, like any good friend, and I love Tom to death, he's a good human being and consider a man like a brother. I did what anyone would do and trademark and copyright Conjugate Tactical for myself so that he can't have it. But that's, again, short answer made long. That's the gist of how everything kind of came to be, is this is just the work we've always done. But when it took a name, it really it became a thing. And now that we've got a team of people, we've got our accounts and units that we work for, the public side of what we do as well. It's well, now we've got a real organization that needs to be tended to. And so now it's treated as a full-blown business entity versus just a style of training.
To show my bias, I do Conjugate Tactical, and I've done a lot of programs over the years. And when I got out of the military, like you, my knees, my back, my hips just fucked. And I still wanted to go hard. I still wanted to go all out in the gym just to feel that and still feel alive. And most programs more CrossFit-ish oriented would crush me for too long. When I started doing yours, there's maximal effort throughout the program, but for some reason I started feeling better.
That's awesome.
And got stronger. And I mean, just what is the magic built into the program that allows you to go max effort, dynamic effort, repetitive effort, and then still feel better at the end of the day?
So there's no, I wouldn't say magic necessarily. There's just an understanding. If I had any hobbies or interest in life whatsoever outside of just doing gym stuff, it probably wouldn't exist. But the before we get into any of that, the statement I always like to preface all of that with is that if any of this works for you, the thumbs up or the tip of the cap goes up the food chain to the legacy of Louis Simmons and Westside Barbell. And if it doesn't work for you, it's because I delivered a shitty adaptation of it. So it's taking the components. And granted, at Westside Barbell, we're known for powerlifting and all the crazy stuff. Like if, the 3 minutes in that Bigger, Faster, Stronger documentary from back in the day, that predates me. But then there's the new documentary. There's all kinds of stuff going on. The powerlifting side is honestly, that's the public perception. That's the little peak that everyone sees. And the base underneath it is decades and decades of research, sports science, applied to the scientific method, trial and error, cutting and pasting, problem solving, whatever term you want to use. So we just did a lot of that. And like I said, we've gotten really lucky with what we believed pro MMA fighters at the WEC, UFC level needed back in 2008, 2009 timeframe, and built upon that. And so to actually answer your question, the first component is understanding the demand. So again, I've worked with dudes like you and some, guys like you that it's like, okay, those demands are much more intense, but they're not all that different from, a different profession or a different style of this. So it's like, okay, well, we pair up that demand, i.e., in our space, maybe it's running a mile or clearing rooms or bounding or any number of, you throw on your American flag tough guy shirt or whatever all that stuff is, And it's like, okay, well, each one of those demands carries with it data. It's like, okay, well, at what speed is your heart rate while you're performing task A, or at what speed is this weight moving? It doesn't really matter if it's a barbell or a human being or, I always use in our seminars, I use the example of law enforcement in that, we always prepare for doomsday, the wolf, all that cool stuff. It's very, very important. You should shoot, fight, and do all those things to make sure you're taken care of because there are good police officers out there. Not all of them are bad, but there are bad ones, So it's like, okay, all those things are very, very important. But I would say a majority of law enforcement injuries, and there's statistical data all over the place. We work with the academy here, but injuries come from dragging dead deer off the highway, pushing a disabled vehicle off to the shoulder, not always getting shot or getting the hell beat out of you and things like that. So it's like, okay, there's a degree of durability and resilience. Well, how do we do that? The repetition method. If you're pushing that vehicle and your heart rate spikes through the roof and it's moving at 0.3 to 0.5 meters per second or less, you're displaying some degree of maximal strength. It may be kind of anecdotal, admittedly, but it's like, okay, very strong, have a gas tank and be able to move quickly because, then you flip back to the doomsday stuff of law enforcement. It's like, man, you just got done pushing a vehicle and 30 minutes later, you're fighting a crackhead. You don't know what's going to happen. So that idea of readiness really kind of appeared very, very appealing to us. And, to kind of predate all of it, going back to the very beginning of law enforcement at one of the SWAT conferences, and I swear there's a purpose behind this, I'm sorry. But at the very beginning of my law enforcement career, I went to a SWAT conference here in Indiana, and there was a dude named Peter Blaber was the guest speaker, and he'd released a book called The Mission to Men and Me.
Delta Force, yeah.
Yeah, dude. Got to meet this guy, listen to him talk, and we talk about the examples of like great leadership, military, poor leadership, all that stuff. Put that in the same audience of law enforcement officers listening to this dude speak, and like CAG's pretty cool, man. Like that's a pretty cool group. I obviously I never worked there, or met some of the dudes who have, and learned a lot from guys directly and indirectly who've followed different paths. But it's like, man, this is a pretty intelligent dude. He's got some great things to say, and there's SWAT cops, good cops and bad cops. Don't get me wrong, across numerous departments are. I always call it you don't want me to see red, bro. That crowd. It's like, I feel like we should be listening to the guy who ran Delta. But anyway, he had a chapter on there, a chapter in his book, which was world class, titled Don't Plan, Prepare. So the idea of preparedness is where I was going with that, was rooted in early inadvertently by attending this conference. And it was like, well, that's what we need the Westside system for, or this conjugate method for, is to prepare these bodies. And we did it for MMA by building a great base for the jiu-jitsu coach, the striking coach, the MMA coach to work with. And then, that evolved into tactical of, well, yeah, I don't know how to be a SEAL, but the dudes we've met, it seems like we need to be able to bash through doors, do the job, maintain endurance, all the same demands. They're just flavored relatively differently across profession, and then with varying levels of intensity. And I would call it practicality. And that, like law enforcement, for example, I would say one of the most tame things you could do is probably be the number 2 on a canine track. So the dog handler's doing his thing. He's just got to have a second body with him to do cop stuff if it's needed. And it's like, okay, you're just basically walking. That's zone 2, zone 3 cardio, depending on the terrain and the temperature outside. But then, and I was a police officer from 2009 to early 2015. That was the era of those dudes doing those bath salt things. So it's like we went for a nice walk in the woods, and now we're fighting a dude roped out of his mind on bath salts. So you talk about sliding scale of intensity. It's like, well, that's the sauce. It's like, well, how do we manage that? And again, it's all in the context of the Westside methods of ensuring the intensity ebbs and flows, because not everything, and we'll make this joke with some of the guys on our instructor team as well, who, follow the path that you guys did, of like, man, I never went to Buds. One of the boys took me around the campus there to tour everything. It was amazing, great experience, because I didn't have to do the things you guys did.
You could smell the vomit.
Yeah, dude, it seems like a pretty unhappy place. But it's like, man, if you use that, for example, and again, this is my interpretation, I don't know what I don't know, but it's like, that was a few months of your life, not your entire career. And physical training or the pursuit of this athletic readiness kind of takes a similar theme, in that not everything needs to be a death festival, murder, kill, destroy yourself. But at some point, longevity becomes quite appealing, and the demands change, or even the goals change throughout the career. And it's like, well, training should mirror that. It doesn't necessarily be the specificity of working with a 100-meter sprinter or a hurdler or anything like that. But if you kind of balance Lou's development of the Westside system against that one chapter in Peter Blaver's book about prepare, don't plan, that was the catalyst for Westside Barbell to launch the tactical program. And then it's evolved into our standalone company now for the last 6 years, give or take.
When you think about longevity, a lot of people would hear max effort. So like a 3-rep max back squat or a 1-rep max deadlift as being not longevity. Is there an age cap on your programs, or do you think that is longevity, that a 60-year-old man who's with a moderate weightlifting background could jump into this program?
I would say yes, without being just like a generic company guy that we've got every answer you could ever need. It really is like with the context, but that's where, you've got to read, like YouTube, all this stuff. But at Westside, man, like Lou told us to read books, so we read books, and then you reread the books numerous times and interpret it differently. You read them in different orders, and the data is interpreted differently, But if you look at the concept of max effort, or the max effort method per se, there's the lift itself, depending on what force velocity curve you read, what tribe you believe in, that kind of stuff. Ultimately, we've got a barbell moving at 0.3 to 0.5 meters per second or slower against external load, which would be the plates on the bar. So if you don't get caught up, and that's why I love what we do with maturing adults, our private work is, we don't really have a lot of 19-year-old hard charters. We got dudes that went through that phase. They want to stay in the game. But when it comes to the actual maximal lifts themselves, it's culture based. And the reason I say that is, if your entire life is smelling salts, chalk, slapping each other, death metal, dude, you're going to fizzle out quick. But if you use the actual meat and potatoes of the method, that contraction simultaneously trains the central nervous system and provides a very strong signal to the musculature needed to lift that barbell at 0.3 to 0.5 meters per second or slower. So if you resist the urge to compare yourself to world record holders, and just, I call it an AA comparison versus an AB comparison, or apples to oranges, apples to apples, whatever analogy you want to use. It really doesn't matter if you're 75 years old lifting 50 pounds or 25 years old lifting 500 or 700, 800 pounds, whatever these guys are doing nowadays, because the method is the parameters you follow to lift the barbell at a specified speed. And then the way we organize it in tactical, and there's a lot of great coaches out there in organizations and whatnot, but the way we organize it in tactical is just kind of based off of experience, man. Like, if you, like, even without the pistols and uniforms of military and law enforcement, even at Westside, when we used to travel and do the seminars all the time, it was like max effort Monday, no matter what. If it's a 1 rep max deadlift on the board, we're doing it. And this is, again, my gym in Indiana, not Westside proper. That's a totally different monster. But it was like after 14, 18 hours in a truck, come back and try to lift heavy as possible. It almost always is resulted in a minor injury. So it's like, okay, well, we'll dial that back to a heavy set of 3 or a heavy set of 5, or maybe just pull a sled. And it's like, okay, there's all these variables that throw you away from optimal. And as long as you take that into account and train, I would say, a culture-based training ethos around, it's okay to use discretion and common sense of, like, if you're not at your best that day, don't push yourself to the limit. And that can transcend any age or capacity in regard to this stuff. But if you're training under an ethos or in a culture that is no excuses, that, whatever it is, there may not be excuses. Yeah, excuses are not okay. But there might be very great reasons why that individual shouldn't run a 200-meter sprint on pavement with a 50-pound rucksack. And taking that into account with, again, I only spent 5 years and change in the military, and I spent just about the same amount of time in law enforcement. So I don't know everything, but our team's got a wealth of experience. And it appears that giving guys the green light to take care of themselves, it's all that's really missing from a lot of great organizations. And when we organize our training, it's not necessarily there's nothing wrong. You can train with us however you want. Like, I'm not cool enough to tell people no. But if you're looking for the theatrical side or the entertainment side, man, we don't need to yell at you. We don't need to haze you and insult you if you miss a time standard or any of that stuff. It's like, man, my primary training partner was a UFC bantamweight for 12 or 13 years in the weight room. And I could out deadlift him. And then when we hit the grappling mats, or God forbid, put on the gloves, which was a mistake I made one time with that fella, you realize that this stuff is not the end all be all for everything. It's a portion of a formula that equates either an operator, a soldier, a Marine, a police officer, a fireman. Your strength conditioning is a base to build from, not the end all be all. But that, admittedly, that does not sell t-shirts. So I think it's where part of a disconnect is.
From what I remember is I think you have 4 different programs under the Conjugate Tactical umbrella. You got the basic, the door kicker, the engine, and I think downrange.
Yeah.
Can you kind of give a brief overview of those 4 different ones for people who might look into it?
Yeah. So first off, naming them goes to our kettlebell instructor, and my right-hand man, this dude named Zach. We kind of stole him from CrossFit. He was the kettlebell subject matter expert, him and Jeff Martone. But he's told me that calling things like endurance-based programming, he's like, people don't like that. So the names, the credit of the names go to Zach. But basic program is basically how we train in the gym here. There's all the programs have an emphasis in strength. Maximal strength is the cornerstone of what we do. And like we talked, it's a-okay to let the intensity ebb and flow. Like, I love when people set PRs, but no one's going to pay you $500 for bumping your bench up $5, at least not in this gym. So every program has an emphasis on that strength component, if for no other reason, injury prevention. But basic is what we run in the gym here since 2009, and it's just evolved into the Westside methodology. It's all we know now. So front, back, top, bottom, push, pull, general physical preparedness with an emphasis on strength as we all age in the gym here. Some of our folks have been in this gym for over 15 years. So they've gone from their 30s to their 50s with us, and we're just learning all along the way. And then when you go to engine, it's a degree of that, a good main movement, typically brought to a heavy set of 2 or 3 more so than always maxing out. But the work becomes a little bit more driven towards the endurance athlete. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a formal triathlon or anything like that. And I know the hybrid athlete is coming back now, the powerlifting and marathon running, depending on where you're at in the year. And that's a wonderful expression of physicality as well. But for most part, engine is designed for folks who like the heavy breathing more than the grunting that comes with heavy weightlifting. It's very kettlebell and calisthenic based. So there's not as much variety in what we do as other institutions out there. And it's just based on the respect of our athletes in that, like, dude, I'm professional gym bro, And as soon as I get around a high level grappler, everything that I'm good at is irrelevant with your best friend sitting on your chest, reminding you how terrible you are at grappling. So a lot of the engine work goes towards the endurance guys, and the strength, the basic takes care of the general population. And then door kicker is for the folks that are kind of like, dude, that's all fine and dandy, but I like being big, explosive, and strong, even at the expense of gas tank. And a lot of that work is the idea of what one of the guys said it best is like, dude, I use this in case I need to clear an apartment buildings. And this goes back several years, but when there was still a lot of raiding and working overseas, guys wanted to be in really good shape because you might take down 15, 20, 60 doors in a day. And again, very similar to fighting, but if you take away the danger, the violence, and the skill set, it's just work, and that's not to disrespect jiu-jitsu, striking, any of it. But if we get rid of the actual flavor of the effort, it's just ultimately work, So we want to make sure that we train that work in a capacity that's befitting the athlete executing the training. So be very strong with an emphasis on recovering faster, be very explosive, because I don't need a 1,000-pound squatter who can't get out of the way of a right hook, and then downrange is really just, I don't want to diminish it, but it's really a better than nothing option if you don't have access to a full gym. As a professional gym bro, I would rather get you out of the weight room in 45 minutes, recovered and onto the mats or back to the range in the shoot house, doing any number of training, any number of skill sets under other subject matter experts, than pretending the weight room is everything, because it's not. It's the foundation of everything so that your instructors of other disciplines can build a better athlete or shooter or whatever it is. But downrange ultimately takes a little bit of everything, but is understanding that like you have access to a couple kettlebells, gravity is always present, so we can do calisthenics, and a barbell in 2025, a barbell, some plates, and a squat rack or squat stands. Those are pretty readily available no matter where you're at on the planet.
I always wondered this. What are your thoughts on zone 5 training, like greater than 90% max heart rate? Mm-hmm. How often would you want that to be in a program, ideally?
So we answer that in the seminar a lot, and I always make the joke that we're not going to pay a university $18,000 to $22,000 to tell us this, so I don't have a college or a university study to prove it. But having been on a team that trained UFC level title contenders in fight camp, which is a window of 6 to 8 weeks leading up to a fight, we have that individual creating workouts 2 to 4 times a week, depending on the level they're at, that encourages zone 5 for 3 5-minute rounds or 5 5-minute rounds 2 or 3 times ahead of a title fight. So 6 to 8 weeks, folks that need it would be on a zone 5 sort of deep end of the pool. We call them hard hitter workouts, 2 to 4 times a week. Average it out, call it 3 times a week in fight camp. It is, but it's for a very short period of time, and it's for a very specified reason. Outside of that, 1 to 3 times a month, or maybe once a week, going into that deep end of the pool or the darkness, whatever you want to call it, that zone 5 is, for us, man, it's proven to be more than enough for dudes from SOCOM down to road cops and, veterans of both of those spaces, or just general population. It's not a condescending term. You guys have given us some of the coolest coins on the shelf. Don't get me wrong, but helping, it's still just as exciting after 17 years of doing that, 16 years almost of running the gym and then years prior. But watching a gal get her first pull up, all those things are still just as exciting. So it's like, yeah, all that stuff, the general population is not a condescending term, but if there's no reason to live in zone 5, you don't have to go there.
Let's pivot more to you as a coach. So you entered this at a really unique time, I think, in like training history, where you saw the union of Westside and their strength method with CrossFit, with military getting involved, law enforcement getting involved, and then it's starting to kind of branch out on its own again in many different directions. What maybe are some of the main like positives you've taken from all these different communities along the way from like a coach's perspective?
Man, I would say from the lens, the coach's perspective, CrossFit was wonderful. I went to my level 1 in, I think, the fall of 2007. So I just gotten out of the military. We were overseas and the cool guy units were doing it. So my dumb ass was like, well, you guys are cool. I'll do that. It was everything I was doing was terrible and wrong in hindsight, but it seemed cool. Got tired. So I went to my level 1 in Blower Tactical in Virginia Beach. So, your guys' backyard. So I met some dudes down there that kind of gave us some good information and things. And again, the lens to look through as a strength coach, when it comes to, I would say, the importance of culture, I left CrossFit in 2010. So I don't know what I don't know, but we're still in and out of that space with athletes and friends. But at that moment in time, culture, I don't think there's my window of time in CrossFit. I don't think there was a better institution as far as creating an importance on training culture and ethos than that era of CrossFit. Because you think about it, man, it was like everything you need is all encompassing, or it's encased within its own environment. And yeah, you can put a pessimistic spin on anything, but it was like, dude, these guys are just, you got DevGuru guys telling morbidly obese human beings that it's okay to walk this 5K instead of running it in 16 minutes, And I said, well, that's pretty neat. So the idea of layering in humility, competence, and scalability into a training culture that just people want to lift weights and have a good time, there's no one better on the planet than that era of CrossFit. And that led into the specialty courses where I found Westside. And when it comes to, I would say, determination, the like solution or problem solving in regard to building strength, there's no one better on that front than Westside Barbell, because anyone who rivals Westside, and again, I'm biased as all hell. I'm not going anywhere else. I'll burn my gym down and stop lifting weights before I speak ill of Westside Barbell because of all they've done for me. But I truly believe in what we do. But when it comes to creating strength and developing sports science, there's no one better at it than us. And by us, I mean the institution in the history of Westside Barbell. And anyone says that they can't. Like, everyone that's doing this has been built by Louis Simmons in one way, shape, or form. But when it comes to staying in your lane and being consistent in what you do, I would still have to say that Jim Jones is probably the best at it, because they've never deviated from where they were prior to the movie 300 to where they are as of what's today, the 10th. I found them prior to 300 when that whole thing came out, the Spartan movie and to where they're at now. It's damn near the same institution with evolution in it. Like, things get better over the course of 20 years. But their ethos, their mindset, their approach to training is identical, minus improvement, to what it was years ago. So when it comes to that vein, it's like, well, that's another important box too, is evolution is important, but you don't have to 90-degree pivot based on what's trending. And I don't think that they ever have. I hope and I truly believe that we do a good job of staying in our role as athletes and coaches and not overstepping our bounds into all the other areas of physicality that, whether it's a special operator, a road cop, or you name it, we've got your back on strength, and that's it.
I dig it. We used Jim Jones early back in the Mark Twight days when I was in the team, their operator fitness program. A lot of good stuff. Pivoting a little bit, I mean, let's dive into motivation real quick, because I learned in Buzz and throughout later on that some people, when they do this, anything, a workout program, something in the operator world, they're going to do it to the point where they'll literally almost die trying to do it well. Their heart, mind, and soul into it. And then some people, they just don't give a fuck. Like, if you want to have an early morning workout, someone's going to say they'll be there the night before, they're going to cancel on you. As a coach, have you found a way to get people to give a damn? Or is there literally just an intangible in some people that they're just going to be there no matter what, and some people aren't?
At risk of sounding like a politician, where instead of answering your question, I just go off on a tangent, which I unintentionally do. I don't want to do it on purpose. But in regard to motivation, there's several approaches, I believe. And what's worked well for us is ensuring that when someone starts with us, or, whether it's in person, remotely, or just someone we've met in passing, is to encourage that person. And that's where I'm huge on culture of, like, all this stuff has to make sense, man. Like, be in the military, like, when you get to unblouse your boots and walk outside the wire, it's like, this is awesome, versus having to do all the rules, but it's like the culture thing is huge. And so it's like, okay, well, we encourage everyone to understand and appreciate that you have to have a realistic expectation of the outcomes based on the inputs. And it's like, man, if you don't, using fighting, for example, like, if you're not fighting in the UFC, we probably don't have to train full time like a guy who is. And so creating that sort of permission slip, for lack of a better term, that it's okay to train realistically within your goals and availability. That's kind of step one, is that it's okay if you're not as big of a monster as this dude over here or killing it like she is over here. You're getting started. It's cool. But the main thing is to focus, like for us, our biggest mission is longevity. And we tell them, like, man, if you are in this to just destroy yourself every day, you're not going to last. And then having a doubting Thomas is a wonderful thing. Someone who's like, I had your mindset, beat the hell out of myself. I pumped the brakes. And, like I said, the intensity has to ebb and flow. So we try to really make that, it's repeated, it's said out loud, it's mentioned numerous times in our seminars, our work in our gym, and the writing we do online as well, that it's like, man, motivation is great. But if you're relying on smelling salts, death metal, slapping each other every Monday when we're going to deadlift, it's like, dude, that's not going to last, man. I don't care what you're supplementing with or anything like that. You just can't stay on a razor's edge 24/7. So admittedly, we've been so fortunate with some of our athletes and experiences that we've had that, we can point you at the guy who used to think that way. And then when he started pumping the brakes on the crazy, his athletic progress started to move forward. Things started to get better. When it comes to motivation and obligation, it's the teamwork approach of, for the MMA stuff we did, and I don't have any other pro athletes. I avoid them at all costs now. But it's like, for us, our approach to MMA was, it's a team sport with one competitor. And it's like, man, when we're doing our training, I've got nothing to offer on the technique side, but if someone's just got to get beat on because that's part of the training session, then I got about 245 pounds of meat for you to shoulder while you're strapped into the belt squat and beat the hell out of. I got you. So for us, we've always placed a great emphasis on obligation to the team, regardless of what that looks like. Whatever this org group or this team or this unit you're involved with is like, man, like you said, if like we're training at 5 a.m. and you wake up and that alarm clock, the sleepy's got you, you're not going. Well, you need to know that you let your teammates down. And if we've got this thing moving well, and the culture has to be tended to 24/7, it's like anything else, you got to constantly be mindful of it. It's like, dude, when someone truly does get booted out or we don't want you around anymore, and it shows consequences to those that remain, it's like, okay, like this is something of substance and we want to preserve it. I think that overdoes motivation, because everyone's going to have good day, bad day. I don't care if you're Jason Bourne, man, like everyone's going to have an off day. But if you show up for everybody that you train with, your training partners, man, that's going to outweigh that self-driven motivation.
What about, I guess, the last major question before we finish up with a lightning round? What is maybe one thing you learned as a coach in all these years that is, I guess, most fundamental to your craft that maybe would apply to other people's craft, whether in business or military or sales or leadership or whatever?
Man, I would say is hear everybody, but only listen to a select few. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way, but there's that secret government organization of they say, I'll put the tinfoil hat on, but advice is free, man. People can give it away. And it's not, I'm yet to meet anybody that I know for a fact gave me bad advice intentionally just to hurt me, but I've been given a lot of bad advice inadvertently. And when I'm young and naive, it's terrifying back then. Like looking back of like, man, we used to choose between lunch and dinner because we knew we weren't having both. And someone's telling me I gotta pay for this, I gotta sign up for that. You have to have this. So it became clear of like, I'm not tough enough or cool enough to be a dick to anybody. So I'm always going to nod and try and be polite. And I truly try my very best when I'm Jason, the individual, in a conversation or a conference or anything. I really try my best to truly approach this with an open notebook and a pen and a clear slate. And I'm not going to interrupt you or call you an idiot, because that's just not, you don't do that. And it's like, okay, I heard everything you said, but I'm only listening to a few people. It's like when it comes to business advice, like, man, do you own a business? That's not an end all be all. Not everything has to be an absolute, but if you're firing off business advice because you watch Shark Tank, I'm going to be the one that pays the price, or the small business owner, I should say, is going to be the one that pays that price because you projected this concept as an absolute truth. And I just lost $500 by signing up for something. So that would be the blanket, all-encompassing. If I have to give anything to however many people hear this that I've never even met, is to hear everybody out of kindness and opportunity, but only listen to a select bit of information that comes across your plate, because this can be overwhelming.
Let's wrap it up with a couple quick ones. What do you do to prime yourself for the day?
Man, it's the things I can control. So I know my alarm clock. I try to set on, I have a coffee date with my buddy Scott a couple times a week. So we get up and go to the same Starbucks at 4:30 when they open. So if that day goes, I know my alarm clock is set for 3:41, which there's no real reason other than I know if I hit snooze, that gets me up at 3:50 on the dot, because the snooze only lasts 9 minutes on an iPhone.
Wait, if you're getting a 3:41, when do you go to bed?
Oh man, I'm 41, dude. I go to bed at like 8:30, 9 o'clock now.
Okay, so you're getting like a solid 7-8 hours a night.
Yeah, I'm still going for it. Like the chapter of me, like getting 2 hours, 4 hours, like I had to button that. I got sick as all hell last year. So it's been a lot slower approach to staying alive now. So I've got my routine on when I don't set an alarm Tuesday or Thursday or Sunday. So I just get up when I get up, and that gives me a little bit of freedom, you know. But if we have coffee date, I set my alarm at a specific time. And if we don't have the mandate, then I still set my alarm at a very specific time, because I like to come down here to my gym Monday, Wednesday, Friday for the 5:30 group. And these are the folks we've all aged together. Most of them have been here since the day we opened, if not prior. And it's just a great group of human beings. But on those days, my alarm is set for the same time every time, which is 4:31. Because again, in case I need to hit the snooze, I have to get up with a zero. More often than not, I'm up well before my phone. But you know, I stopped drinking a while ago. Everything. So getting up early has always been kind of my jam. But it's just so nice now without a hangover. It's actually enjoyable. But to actually execute, man, it's coffee. Like absolutely, I don't mind giving up alcohol, but a world without coffee is one I don't want to be in. And then I read. I try to really read every morning for at least 15 to 20 minutes of whatever is in. You know, right now I'm on Jordan Peterson's new book, We Who Wrestle with God. But pretty much almost always nonfiction, everything from military history to mindset and business practice, all that kind of stuff. So every morning starts with coffee and book time. The third thing, if we're looking for three options, is controlling the alarm clock is kind of that's not really a thing, but the coffee, the book, and then honestly just trying to think. When it's about 13 minutes to drive from my home to my gym. And that's one thing I've learned. It's only been probably about a year or two that I've been truly disciplined enough to stay and give myself 5, 10, 15 minutes to just dead silence, think about anything. Because, you know, I'm not going to try and turn your podcast into like a therapy couch, but like for me, I got wrapped up in the provider side of things with the financial side of, as long as I'm working and saving and investing the money, it's for the family, then I can justify missing everything. You know, whether it's kids games, you name it, you know, family parties, get-togethers, like it was out of control for a very long time. So for me to take anywhere from like 5 to 15 minutes to get to town, where no emails, no music, no text, no phone calls, nothing. Granted, this is 5 something in the morning, so there's not a lot of people awake. But that's the thing that honestly has changed the most for me in the recent years. But taking 10 or 15 minutes to do nothing but just have like in a solo think tank, that's been the biggest change for me, of like realizing how bad I was fucking up all these opportunities, because I was just so high strung with this legitimate addiction to like a high performance lifestyle of like, how many flights can I take in a month? How many hours have I put in? How little sleep did I get? Like I had 4 white monsters today. Like I'm going to live forever because you only had 2. Like it really got, for me personally, it really got out of control. And it's the coffee, the book, and just that quiet reflection time, man.
Some of the most hardcore guys I know are dedicated readers, especially in the morning. So, I mean, what are like a couple books that have changed your life along the way?
We've never met. And like I said, I'm not drinking anymore, but I'll still buy you a beer or a coffee or something. But I don't want to get my ass beat, but the extreme ownership, dude, I don't care what anyone says. I dig the Jocko stuff, man. Like I got some buddies that are from your lineage who bust my balls a little bit, but man, a dude introduced me to that stuff right when my son was born. And the only way to get him to sleep was driving around in my man van with him in the car seat. I must have listened to the first 50 episodes of his podcast, just driving McDonald's to McDonald's, slugging Diet Cokes, listening to the podcast. And then, you know, read the book. Everything just clicked, man. It was just right place, right time, right chapter of my life that was like that extreme ownership offered a lot of organization, the stuff that I had going on in my head that really didn't make a lot of sense. And I was like, man, this is just a wonderful thing for that moment in time. It's it's kind of run its course. I still love the podcast. I love the books. I've got nothing negative to say. When I met Jocko, the dude was kind, world class, and 100% transparent. Like what you see is what you get, So it's like just an excellent chapter in my life. But that book, Extreme Ownership, and then a couple of follow-on ones, I can't recommend them enough to any in women too. But as far as like grown men go, or young men trying to become adults or dads or anything like that, I think there's tremendous value in there. The book we mentioned earlier, The Mission, the Men and Me, I think is absolutely world class when it comes to business. A buddy of mine, Curtis, gave me a book last year called Unreasonable Hospitality, which is kind of silly, but it's about a restaurant group and a member of it who became the CEO of a huge, thing. But it's 3 Michelin star restaurant in New York to Smash Burger to Vegas, all this crazy stuff. But ultimately, the book, they couldn't figure out how to get their 3rd Michelin star up in New York until they focused on everything but the food, because they couldn't get any better. So they focused on the customer experience, the culture, hospitality, and everything that goes with it. And it's really about going above and beyond. And that's what nudged them towards the 3rd Michelin star. And then dude got burned out and ultimately started Smash Burger, which is like the best thing in any airport ever. But for business, I think that's world class. And then honestly, I'm hoping, without being a cornball about it, I really hope that someday the Bible becomes a huge part of that list for me. Working on it, just not there yet. And the one I read last year that had the biggest impact on me, as far as just like, not necessarily political thinking, like I think what I think, but there's a book called The Coddling of the American Mind that I would say in the last 3 to 4 months, that's probably been the biggest like jaw dropper of a book. But hearing the thought process of someone self-critiquing their own group of shortcomings and kind of interpreting how things have kind of gotten as crazy as they've gotten. I love that book because it was written by a dude who doesn't think like I do politically. And everything is assessed and communicated purely objectively, good, bad, and everything in between. And I just thought it was a really good book with as supercharged as the country is right now on just having to hate everything or blindly follow everything. And I was like, man, this dude's just, whatever he drank that morning, it just makes sense to me when he wrote that book. So I would say that list has been absolutely huge. And then obviously the Westside Barbell Book of Methods is, for professional reasons, that I think that's the best strength training book any human being could ever have.
All right, Gus, this was awesome. How can people find you and follow your work?
I gratefully let me come on your podcast, man. This has been a neat experience. As far as finding me, if I'm home, I'm either at my house, and if I'm not there, I'm at my gym, which is just in Chesterton, Indiana, 1050 Broadway. Like, if you're ever in the area, everyone's welcome to train here. If I just got home from a trip, we charge you your drop-in fee. If we're in a good mood, we're probably going to tell you to keep it or just grab a coffee for me or something on the way. But we're always in the gym here in Chesterton. Online, I have my personal Instagram profile, but I don't check it a whole lot, which is just j.p.gus. And then our company profile is Conjugate Tactical for Instagram. I check that one regularly, and a couple of other people do. So if anyone sends anything, but there's a couple of different people that look at that account, so be careful. Don't send anything too crazy, because it's not just me reading it. And then my email is just jason.gusic@westside-barbell.com. But our role in the universe is try to help people with their strength training. So anything, we field a lot of questions every week. So we just try to always tell people, like, if we can help you, we always will. And if we ever can't, man, just out of respect, not arrogance, we're just going to tell you no, because we can't do what's needed. And this stuff is too important. And our pathway in the tribes we were part of, we can't get in the business of screwing people around for a few bucks, or because our ego is forcing us to say yes to things when we really don't know what we're doing. So that would be the list right there as far as how to get a hold of me or us on the team, because there's a lot of guys and gals they're really carrying the weight of this whole Conjugate Tactical thing and growing it into something far beyond what I ever could. It's a pretty neat, again, it wasn't part of the plan, but it's a pretty neat thing of what's been happening over the last couple of years.
Gus, really appreciate your time, brother.
Oh, dude, thank you so much, man.
That's it for this episode. If you want to check out more from the podcast, head to zeroeyes.com/nobel, where you can see show notes, read more about our guests, and suggest guests or topics of your own. Until next time, stay in the fight. Don't ring the bell.